A room filled with million-pound paintings, polished marble floors, and the finest medical equipment had become the loneliest place in the city. Nurses quietly looked away. Relatives suddenly found urgent excuses to leave. Trusted business partners stopped visiting. The once powerful billionaire who had fed thousands through his charities now sat paralyzed in his wheelchair, unable to lift a spoon to his own mouth. His lunch grew cold as everyone stood nearby pretending not to notice. Then the door opened, and a quiet little girl holding her father's hand walked inside. She looked at the forgotten billionaire with innocent eyes, picked up the spoon without hesitation, and offered him the kindness that no amount of money had been able to buy. Before anyone realized what was happening, tears were running down the faces of people who believed they had already seen everything life could offer. If you believe kindness is stronger than wealth, forgiveness is greater than pride, hope should never be abandoned, and second chances can change lives forever, please like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue sharing stories that remind us that compassion still exists. Cedric Holloway had spent 40 years building one of the largest construction companies in Europe. Newspapers admired his success, television interviews praised his discipline, and business schools studied his leadership. He had risen from poverty through relentless determination, working every possible job before finally opening a small building firm that slowly became an international empire. Although thousands of employees respected him, many also feared him. Cedric demanded excellence, hated excuses, and believed emotions often distracted people from achievement. He donated generously to hospitals and schools but rarely allowed anyone close enough to know the lonely man hidden beneath the expensive suits and confident smile. Everything changed during an ordinary afternoon charity event held at one of his company's new rehabilitation centers. While greeting guests, Cedric suddenly collapsed after suffering a severe stroke. Doctors saved his life, but the damage left much of his body paralyzed. His speech became slow and difficult, one arm refused to move, and he depended on others for almost every daily task. The billionaire who once commanded boardrooms with a single glance now needed help drinking water. The newspapers covered his illness for weeks. Business analysts questioned the future of his company. Investors worried. Friends promised they would always stand beside him. Yet as the months passed, many promises quietly disappeared. Visitors became fewer. Some executives cared more about gaining influence than supporting the man who had built their careers. Even distant relatives who once filled every family celebration gradually stopped coming after realizing Cedric could no longer offer them favors or opportunities. His mansion remained beautiful, but it no longer felt like a home. Sunshine poured through enormous windows every afternoon, lighting elegant furniture that had become little more than decoration around a man trapped inside his own body. Among the staff was a hard-working maintenance employee named Rowan Mercer. Life had never been easy for Rowan. 5 years earlier, his wife had lost her battle with cancer, leaving him to raise their 8-year-old daughter, Elsie, alone. Every morning before work, Rowan packed school lunches, braided Elsie's hair as best he could despite never mastering the skill, and reminded her that kindness always mattered more than popularity. They never had much money, but their little rented house overflowed with warmth, laughter, and treasured memories. Because Rowan could not always afford after-school care during school holidays, the estate manager occasionally allowed Elsie to spend a few supervised hours at the mansion while Rowan completed maintenance jobs. She quietly colored pictures in the staff lounge, read library books, or helped arrange flowers for the reception hall. Every employee adored her because she thanked everyone, smiled easily, and noticed people others ignored. One bright afternoon, Cedric's lunch was placed on a silver tray beside his wheelchair overlooking the gardens. The chef had prepared a perfect meal exactly as instructed by his nutritionist. Yet feeding him required patience. Several staff members looked at one another uncertainly. One nurse had been called away unexpectedly. Another assistant claimed paperwork needed immediate attention. A visiting relative glanced at his watch before quietly walking out. Everyone assumed someone else would eventually help. Cedric watched the untouched meal with silent humiliation. His hands refused to obey him. His pride hurt even more than his body. He had once believed money solved nearly every problem. Yet at that painful moment, surrounded by luxury, he could not persuade a single person to spare 10 minutes of genuine compassion. Rowan was repairing a loose handrail elsewhere in the mansion when Elsie wandered carefully through the hallway carrying a small drawing she hoped to show the gardeners. As she passed the open dining room door, she noticed Cedric sitting alone beside the untouched lunch. She looked around for the adults she expected to see. No one came. Without fear or hesitation, Elsie walked inside. She gently pulled a chair closer. She smiled with the natural warmth only children seem able to possess. Then she picked up the spoon. There was no pity in her face. Only kindness. Slowly, patiently, she helped Cedric eat one careful spoonful at a time, waiting politely between each bite as though nothing about the moment was unusual. She wiped a small drop of soup from the corner of his mouth with a napkin and beamed proudly each time he managed another mouthful. Cedric's eyes filled with tears. Not because of his illness. Because for the first time in months, someone saw him as a human being instead of an obligation. Several employees passing through the hallway froze in complete silence. The estate manager stopped walking. 2 executives lowered their heads in shame. They had all witnessed a little girl doing effortlessly what adults had avoided. When Rowan finally found Elsie, his heart nearly stopped. He rushed forward, afraid she had disturbed the billionaire or broken some important rule. Instead, Cedric slowly lifted his working hand just enough to stop Rowan from apologizing. Through great effort, Cedric whispered that Elsie had given him the finest lunch he had tasted in years. Word spread throughout the company by the following afternoon. Employees spoke quietly about the little girl who had reminded an entire mansion what dignity looked like. Some staff members admitted they had become so accustomed to Cedric's condition that they forgot how lonely dependents could feel. From that day onward, Cedric specifically requested that Rowan and Elsie visit whenever possible. Rowan remained cautious, never wanting his daughter used as entertainment or sympathy. But each visit brought visible changes. Elsie never discussed Cedric's wealth. She asked about the birds outside his window. She showed him school drawings. She described funny mistakes her father made while attempting new hairstyles. She laughed freely, and gradually Cedric began laughing too. The mansion slowly changed. Gardeners started eating lunch together instead of separately. Reception staff spent extra time chatting with elderly visitors. Executives began learning patients' names during charity visits rather than simply posing for photographs. One child's quiet compassion spread through the building like sunlight reaching forgotten corners. As Cedric's emotional health improved, therapists noticed something remarkable. He became more determined during rehabilitation exercises. He practiced speaking longer each day. He tolerated painful physical therapy because he wanted to tell Elsie stories without struggling for every sentence. One afternoon she asked him why so many people seemed frightened of making mistakes. Cedric reflected for a long time before answering. He admitted that throughout his career he had rewarded success so heavily that people eventually became afraid of showing weakness. Somewhere along the way, he had built successful businesses but unintentionally created workplaces where perfection mattered more than humanity. That realization hurt. Yet it also freed him. He called a meeting of senior leadership during broad daylight in the company auditorium. Employees expected another discussion about profits or expansion. Instead, Cedric apologized. He acknowledged his own failures. He explained that leadership without compassion eventually becomes empty. He announced new employee support programs, expanded family leave, improved disability access, and mentoring initiatives based not only on performance but also on character. Many listeners cried quietly because they never expected those words from the man once known as impossible to satisfy. Months later, Cedric visited Rowan and Elsie's modest home for a weekend afternoon picnic in their small garden. There were no luxury decorations, no expensive chefs, and no formal speeches. Rowan grilled simple sandwiches while Elsie proudly served homemade lemonade. Cedric smiled more that afternoon than he had during countless glamorous corporate events. He realized happiness had never been hiding inside grand estates. It had been waiting inside ordinary moments shared with genuine people. Inspired by everything he had learned, Cedric established a charitable foundation supporting single parents facing financial hardship while caring for children. Rather than placing his own name across every building, he named the program after a simple idea that Elsie had unknowingly taught him: every person deserves a seat at the table. Thousands of struggling families eventually benefited from scholarships, childcare support, counseling services, and employment opportunities. Rowan accepted a leadership position overseeing community outreach because Cedric trusted someone who understood hardship firsthand. Years passed. Cedric never completely recovered physically. His wheelchair remained part of his daily life. But something far greater had healed. His heart. He no longer measured success by company value or newspaper headlines. He measured it by the number of people leaving his office feeling respected. Elsie grew into a compassionate young woman determined to become an occupational therapist. Whenever people asked what inspired her career, she smiled softly and explained that every person deserved to be treated with dignity, especially when life became difficult. Rowan often looked at his daughter with quiet pride, remembering the afternoon when she had simply followed her heart without expecting praise. She had never tried to change a billionaire. She had simply refused to let another human being eat alone. Before we reach the end of this story, we'd love to hear from you. Please leave a meaningful comment telling us about a moment when a small act of kindness changed someone's life, or share the lesson from this story that touched your heart the most. On another warm afternoon, Cedric and Elsie sat together in the mansion garden watching butterflies drift among colorful flowers. The same dining room where loneliness once filled the air now welcomed employees, visitors, volunteers, and families around one long shared table every week. No one ate alone anymore. Cedric looked across the smiling faces surrounding him and realized that the greatest fortune he had ever received had not come from contracts, investments, or business victories. It had arrived through the gentle hands of a little girl who saw a hungry man instead of a billionaire. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. May we all remember that the smallest act of kindness can feed not only an empty stomach but also a lonely heart, and sometimes the greatest miracle begins with one person choosing to care when everyone else walks away.